Can you remember where your head was at this time? Why these tracks?
I think that's what we had. I don't think that there was an incredible amount of like deep thought that went into a lot of punk rock.
Well, I mean, Slave to My Estrogen, I mean, that's a pretty big deal. I mean, you guys obviously felt it was necessary to bring it back for the LP, and then
Hmm.
again later on with Tribe 8, like a reworking of it. So,
Yeah.
where did that one come from?
Gonna take a shower and I'm gonna do my hair. Gonna put on makeup so all the boys will stare. I'll put
It
the heat
came a
on the
lot
fire
from
and it'll be fine.
frustration, about about the expectations I felt that were being put on me and how people assumed that like women were just like somehow controlled by their hormones or some sort of like female programming or something that were going to make them want certain things. And I was just always like, this isn't what I want. I didn't want those things for myself. I didn't have this idea that like I was going to have a conventional life. And I think there's a lot more opportunity for boys to have a sense of adventure and to be like, I'm going to be an astronaut or whatever, I'm going to have an unconventional life. And there's so much less of that for girls. And maybe, 40 years later, people want to go back to that type of thinking. But now we do have women astronauts. And now there is a little bit more opportunity, and things are still really slow to change. But I really wanted to be a lot more outspoken about things, about being queer, about being women. I didn't want to make that my whole like personality. And I mean, it's still similar, I think, where it's like, that's who I am, but it's also just like, plus there's all this other stuff, right? And so I feel like when you're discussing things that everybody has an opinion about, or um, there's a whole long history, or if you bring up racism or something, people immediately go, of like, well, I'm not touching this, or it, so you also have to bring in like a sense of humor, so then I feel like a humor is a really great way to talk about things that can be really difficult for people, and to give people permission to just relax a little bit, and to remind us that like um, a lot of what we've built up are taboos or whatever, and like these just the difficulties of communication, and letting ourselves like be vulnerable, because we're so used to having to be on the defensive. And so I would hope that people would like also see how ridiculous it is to try to fulfill this idea of like what being feminine is. And that is just like absurd, that you're stripping away somebody's humanity because you're putting these pressures on them to confine to something. Them being very vague, I know, but yeah.
Well, did you feel that that song went places back then, or was the reason that Tribe 8 brought it back is because you guys felt like it didn't go places and it deserved to?
I think in the with ASF, when I did it, it was just mostly like about being a girl in the punk scene. And I think that with uh, Tribe 8, the context really changed. and the context was more about misogyny in like within like lesbian culture, where there was, and there's so many people who have studied this and written about this that are way smarter than me, that have said it a lot better, but just carrying over a lot of the internalized misogyny from like the general population into like the queer community, where we're still being misogynist, we're still seeing these feminine traits or femininity as being something used to put people down. And it's different for like queer women to have those feelings, where it's like, we've been told this whole time to wear pink, but I refuse to do that because I don't want to be confined to being feminine or whatever. Like in the general broad description, it's like about women being confined to a certain expectations, and how like you have to be that way. And then if you're going to be like a butch dyke or somebody who's masked, like you want to reject those parts of you because you want to be more authentic. And so it gets really convoluted of like, we're still like ostracizing people who are feminine, and we're seeing gender roles as being very binary, and that like it doesn't matter what your gender is, you can be like, there's not a spectrum of like masculine and feminine. For me, it's like, well, there's the masculine spectrum and you can slide back and forth on that, and then the feminine spectrum, and you can like explore all different ends of that, and you might feel different the next day, you know. And you know, it can take a while to get to this place of like, all of this is me and all of this is like, you know, just part of being human. But there was definitely a lot of misogyny, I think, at the time, that I was like, I need to bring this song back because I'm seeing misogyny within this much smaller subculture, where, you know, women who, now it's like women who really are androgynous or masculine are being praised, and women who are being feminine are, you know, being ostracized and seeing are being cast into this role of like, well, you're part of the status quo. You're you represent like, you know, something that I can't accept in myself, you know, or I am dissociated from, you know, because we associate like things like vulnerability with feminine. And, you know, I think a lot of times in our culture, like we see vulnerability as being weak, or vulnerability is just like, you're going to be, you know, crushed or destroyed or something. So we like don't want to explore that side of ourselves.